Well, look, Phil, as you said, if this persists, this tariff persisted with Mexico and Canada, it would mean billions of losses for the domestic car industry.
It didn't start with headlines. It didn't start with a press conference. It started with a whisper in factories, in parking lots, in the hum of a machine that used to run loud and proud. Then one day, it stopped. It didn't start with headlines. It didn't start with a press conference. It started with a whisper in factories, in parking lots, in the hum of a machine that used to run loud and proud. Then one day, it stopped. March 2025, Ford CEO doesn't come to DC for headlines or handshakes. Jim Farley walks in with one message: if these tariffs stick, the American auto industry could lose billions. The media spins it as politics, but the real story is about survival. You see, a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and parts from Mexico and Canada, and a 10% tariff on China-made EV components wasn't just a move, it was a gut punch. America didn't just slap tariffs on competitors. It hit itself, right where it hurts most. Most Americans didn't notice the moment things began to unravel, but in a warehouse in Kentucky, a machine slowed in a supplier lot in El Paso. A shipment never arrived in a Ford factory in Michigan. A $38,000 car suddenly cost $42,000. And across the supply chain, the silence spread. You see, nearly 60% of parts used in a US-built Ford vehicle come from Mexico or Canada. That includes Mexican-made transmissions for the Bronco, Canadian steel and aluminum for the F-150, wiring, sensors, brake systems, parts that cross borders 7 or more times before a vehicle is built. Disrupt one link and the whole system locks up. Trump's message was simple: just build it here. But here's the truth they won't put in a soundbite. There is no such thing as a 100% American car. Not Ford, not Chevy, not even Tesla. Modern cars are global puzzles, stitched from 30,000 parts sourced from over 40 countries. Even if it's assembled in Detroit, that assembly depends on a network that reaches to Taiwan, Germany, Japan, Mexico, and China. So when Trump invokes Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, claiming national security, he didn't make America stronger. He pulled the pin on a grenade buried in the foundation of American industry. Goldman Sachs analysts did the math. Just the tariff on parts alone meant $2,000 to $4,000 would be added to the price of the average vehicle. So now, a Ford Edge jumps from $38,000 to over $42,000. A Mustang Mach-E creeps up toward $60,000. And a Ford Explorer once at $44,000 now dances past $48,000. And that's before the layoff notices start showing up. You didn't hear about it in the news. There were no protest marches, just quiet cuts in places like Romulus, Michigan, El Paso, Texas. Aguascalientes, Mexico. Ford wasn't firing directly, yet. But their suppliers were a slow exhale of jobs, one shift at a time. Collapse doesn't come with a bang, it comes in silence. Here's the harsh reality no one wants to admit. This industry runs on trust. Trust that parts will arrive on time. Trust that trade agreements will hold. Trust that governments won't sabotage their own manufacturers. Margins are razor thin, miss one part, and that $50,000 Ford becomes a paperweight on four wheels. That's why Ford, GM, and even Tesla need global supply chains. And tariffs, they don't rebuild America. They just raise the price of survival. Americans love to hear made in the USA, but what does that actually mean? According to an HTSA, even US-assembled cars are composed of 40% to 60% foreign parts. Think about it, transmissions often made only in Mexico or Japan. Batteries, 60% come from China. Sensors made in Germany and Taiwan. Even if you slapped an American flag on the hood, The inside still reads global parts. Trump says it's leverage. Ford calls it a loaded gun pointed at itself. So here's the twist. Ford didn't hold a press conference. Ford didn't launch a protest. Ford started walking away, quietly, strategically. They began pulling investment from US plants, freezing hiring, and looking abroad. factories in Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, once seen as the future, now sit half-stocked and in limbo. And while politicians scream about bringing jobs home, Ford is doing the math. If America won't protect the system, we'll go where the system works. And with that ... Ford replied, most people won't notice the shift. They'll just see car prices going up, they'll blame inflation. They'll wonder why factories are closing. But not you. You stayed, you listened, and now you understand how one tariff can change an entire nation. But this story is just getting started. Previously, we watched as Ford quietly pushed back against America's tariffs. As prices spiked, jobs vanished, and the most powerful car company in US history started backing away from its own backyard. But what happened next? How did Trump respond? And who's really winning the Eve War? March 26, 2025. Trump invokes Section 230 to undo the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, enforcing a 25% tariff on all vehicles and parts from Mexico and Canada, 10% tariff on Chinese EV components, batteries, and electronics. He calls it a national security measure. He says it'll bring jobs back. But here's what actually happens. Ford warns of billions in losses. Stellantis lays off 900 workers. Jaguar, Land Rover, and Audi suspend US exports entirely. Suddenly, the entire North American auto ecosystem, one of the most tightly wound and efficient supply chains in the world, starts falling apart. Every car built in the US depends on cross-border trade, sometimes up to 7 times per part. So now, automakers have 3 options. Absorb the losses, raise prices, leave the market. Spoiler alert, they do all 3. Ford models jump by $2,000 to $4,000. Factories pause expansion, dealerships sit on half-empty lots. Ford's internal models paint a bleak picture. If this continues, the industry could lose over $100 billion in a single year. Trump's tariffs were pitched as economic leverage, but here's the problem. You can't punish imports without punishing your own factories if those factories depend on those imports. Ford, GM, Tesla, they all built their supply chains assuming global flow would continue. Disrupt that and you get chaos. You don't rebuild a domestic factory overnight. You can't snap your fingers and make semiconductors in Kentucky. What happens instead? EV battery plants sit half-finished. Assembly lines slow down, dealerships watch customers walk away in sticker shock. Meanwhile, China speeds up. While the US fights with itself, BYD, a Chinese EV titan, is busy becoming the largest EV seller in the world, even beating Tesla. Their secret batteries, materials, and electronics are all domestically sourced. Supply chains untouched by US tariffs. And most importantly, they're ramping up production. While US carmakers stall, BYD keeps building and global customers, they're watching. This isn't just about sales, it's about who wins the next industrial revolution. Back in 2024, America had momentum. Ford's battery plant in Ohio was buzzing. GM was catching up to Tesla. Rivian was becoming a real threat. But all of those projects were based on stable trade with Mexico, Canada, and China. Once the tariffs hit, raw materials stalled. Semiconductor shipments delayed, entire facilities went into pause mode. Now, Ford's $11 billion investment in EVs across Tennessee, Kentucky, Michigan, and Ohio is in limbo. No flow equals no future. And while America panics, the world pivots. Germany is doubling down on local EV supply chains. South Korea just locked in a lithium deal with Argentina. China now controls 75% of the world's battery material processing. Foreign automakers like Hyundai, Toyota, BMW aren't impacted by US tariffs because their governments aren't playing economic roulette. So they're gaining US market share while Detroit bleeds out. Trump's team frames it as a reset, a temporary shock to bring factories home. But that's not how industry works, history shows. Once a supply chain breaks, it doesn't just snap back. Once jobs go overseas, they rarely return. Once factories close, they stay closed. Ask the textile towns, the steel cities, the camera companies. Patriotism doesn't pay the bills, strategy does. This isn't a collapse that shows up on the front page. It shows up as a job cut in Toledo, a price hike in Kentucky, a canceled shipment in Detroit, an open factory in Vietnam. Ford knows this. That's why Jim Farley didn't call a press conference. He didn't come to fight. He came to warn, this system is fragile. And if we don't fix it now, we may not get another chance. So now you know what most Americans won't realize until it's too late. This isn't just about cars, it's about how a global power quietly loses its edge. We're not watching a storm hit. We're watching a country misread its own blueprint. And as Ford quietly walks away, the rest of the world is racing ahead. Smash that like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications because in part 3, we expose the full blueprint behind the collapse and the industries it's coming for next.